Hello and welcome to another episode of Prepper Talk Radio. This is Scott and Shane and Paris. We are the trio of preparedness, triage, and life craziness. We are here to help you get better prepared. And today we got a fun show. We've got Pete Robertucci on, and we're going to talk to him about his new book, also about a lot of the workshops he's doing and his history in prepping. And if you remember, we had Angry American on just a little while ago, and they're almost neighbors. So they're kind of lucky. They get to hang out in the same circles. Little jealous because I'm a fan of both now, and we're just grateful to have you on the show.
Well, I appreciate it. Thanks for having me, guys.
You bet.
As we launch into this, I want to remind you guys to check out our favorite food storage hack. It's fully cooked, fully ready to eat. It's the tastiest 3 types of meat. You got your chicken, you got your beef, and then you got your ground beef, and then you got your beef, your roast. And it's all good for 25 years. Check out survivalfrog.com and use the promo code PrepperTalk10, the number 10 at the end. PrepperTalk10, save a little bit on the checkout, but also it'll save you in a big blustering future that we have coming ahead of us. Make sure you go get that now and get yourself ready for Christmas or any time of year. Well, today we have a fun episode. We got Pete Robertucci. Am I saying that right?
You're saying it perfect, actually. I was surprised.
Well, I always like to double check before I go too far in because I have been wrong. But well, guys, Pete is a author. He's a former firefighter, had your own electrical contracting firm or company, down working at the Kennedy Space Center, and you live in Florida near there. Paris and I used to have the kind of his stomping grounds south of you. But we're excited to have you on. You've written, I think, 4 books now. There's the 3 in the Eden series, and then now there's the North of Eden series that just launched.
That's correct. Yeah, and that came out in February. Yep.
And then you've also published some workbooks and survival guides as well.
Correct. Mm-hmm.
But more than anything, you do a ton of workshops, which is the thing that I'm geeking out about. So we're going to talk a little bit about the books, a lot about the training, and then also what do you see from your vantage point that we think preparers, as Shane says, focus on. So without further ado, let's jump in. Check out his website. It's Peter Robertucci. That's with 2 C's, ROBERTUCCI.com. Go check it out. So, Pete, we're excited. What got you into writing these books? It's a little different for everybody. I want to know your backstory. Why did you just go full bore? Because you're 4 books deep now.
Yeah. So when I was working at the fire department in between calls, I was scribbling a couple of things. And the first book, which is 3 Days to Eden, was never intended to go to publication. And I self-admit that it's rough around the edges because I wasn't a writer. I'm just a dumb firefighter who was writing a book in between calls, right? So every year, me and my daughter would go on a hiking trip from a place called Juniper Springs to Hidden Pond through the Ocala National Forest. And through that whole time, I was wondering, because I'm from Florida, I was been a prepper all my life. So I thought to myself, what would happen if stuff went bad while we were out here all by ourselves? So that was the concept behind 3 Days to Eden. I wrote that book. I gave it to my daughter, who was 16 years old at the time, as a Christmas present with no intentions of putting it out to publication. And she dug it. She's like, "Dad, people are going to like this. You need to send this out." I go, "No, I'm an introvert. I don't want to do this." She goes, "Well, if you don't, I'm going to." I go, "Okay." Well, baby gets what she wants. So it went out to publication and it took off. It went crazy. So it was exciting.
Wow. Okay. So she threatened to put it out if you didn't. So you
Exactly.
end up putting it out yourself?
Yeah, I was an independent publisher through the first 3 books. And then the latest book, I actually went through a group that Boyd Craven and Katie Light publishing company that they use. So very excited about that.
Awesome.
That's awesome.
Yeah, we've had Boyd on before too. He's a fun guy.
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting practice. That's something I do all the time is when I find myself in a situation, I think about, okay, what could go wrong? Yep. And how would I prepare for it? And, we could go on for hours about the different situation scenarios. Is that I mean, I am very much like yourself. I'm an introvert myself. You know, to get me talking on the radio, this is like a miracle. This just doesn't happen. And I'm a bit of a writer myself, a blogger, you could say, with book ideas as well. So I think it's a pretty, I wouldn't say widely thought of topic, but I think a lot of us in this community have those thoughts go through our mind. And that's where I think I would mostly like to go in this conversation is how can what you've learned from this writing experience, and of course myself, and that's why I blab on our podcast here about our experiences, is how can we help our listeners? That's really where I'm mainly interested in, and I think that's why you write these books, correct? I mean, so that you can give some insight and obviously to take some research as you're writing the books and so forth. I mean, what's your perspective that way?
Yeah. So on the first book, I kind of, they say, listen, the first rule of prepping is don't tell anybody about your preps, right? Keep your preps to yourself. It's like the Fight Club. But unfortunately, because I was just giving that 3 days to Eden as a gift for my daughter, that was my blueprint for preparedness. Those are actually the steps I had in place. The fact that the main character befriended the Florida militia group, that's what I did. So I had to completely revamp my preparedness aspect once that went to publication. So, so I'm not going to say that 3 days to Eden was a blueprint for everybody to use, but that was certainly my mindset when I wrote that book, because those were my actual plans and they were already put in place.
Awesome.
So what's the macro level premise of the book? What happens? What SHTF scenario did you put into the book to make it exciting?
Yeah, so it started off, just basically current events, corrupt governments, and all that good stuff. But what happened is a computer virus attempted to take down the utility system, the power grid. They failed. So a balloon went up, and a few EMPs actually shut down the majority of the system. But a different take I took on it, which is shown in Birchwood Burning, is not the entire United States is affected. Only some of and you have to really get into the political background, and you can just go ahead and take the 2020 presidential map on who voted red and who voted blue, and you could see that's a fine line where exactly all the EMPs hit. So if you were in one of those red states, guess what? You had no power. Now, blue states, there's a big propaganda move going on through using legacy media, and they just assume that everything going on down south is an insurrection and a civil war. Oh, but that's not the case. So that's the premise. So EMP based event.
Well, I like in Birchwood Burning, I like in that book how you do use a lot of the current players, I guess, in the game. You change the names, but you
protect the
descriptions and their attitudes, and you're like, oh, I know who that is. And you even do, and I gotta laugh at this, you even do a lot of name dropping on gear, like pulling out the pocket knife. If I remember right, the pocket knife was it a Kershaw?
Yeah, well, it's certainly,
yeah. And I'm like, that hit me because I'm like, that's what I carry. I'm like, all right, here we go. But I love that it's taking advantage of the current situation to make it relatable. So I think that's the biggest problem for most people is they think prepping is only for crazy people, or, oh, I don't need to do that. The government's going to take care of me. Or there's just the weird people who just don't think anything bad is ever going to happen. Not even on the small scale of personal life traumas, life challenges. That's why we prepare more than anything, is for those. But this makes a lot of the different things that are going on realistic in where they could roll into, where things can go next. And the whole slamming on the concept of we've got to save our democracy in the book, which you and I, and we all would agree, it's not a democracy. It's a constitutional republic. Get it right. And I love that you brought that up as well. But for me, prepping, the books just get me more excited about doing what I'm already doing. But absolutely having a plan is the number one most overlooked thing, I think, in most preppers' worlds.
Yeah. Having a plan. And the second thing, and probably even maybe more important, is to having that tribe, having that community, right? Like you guys say, I got Chris right around the corner from me. And although he's not in my initial plan, guess what? It's a fallback area. So having a plan, having a community is very, very, very important. I think you're right. And here's the thing, guys. Living in Florida, we prepare every year for hurricanes. So getting in the preparedness industry is second nature to us. Now we're just bringing that into a bigger scale when you're talking about preparing. Because look, I have an obligation as the head of the household, as a father, as a husband, to prepare my family for any scenario. And I look at it. I look at it as an obligation.
It's interesting then that you chose to use an EMP rather than a natural disaster as your catalyst. So I know in the book that 1 second after, there's a section that he gets into about the reality of and likelihood of an EMP really being a danger on the horizon. And did you find in your research for the book that there were similar, that you found that I think he says in that book, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when an EMP will be let off. Did you find in your research that there's a similar, that you found that similarly, that it's going to be a matter of when, not if, that an EMP gets lit off?
I suspect that, and maybe it won't happen in our lifetime, but this is what I tell people, because one of the other things I do is I audit mutual assistance groups. So when I go to their group and see what they were doing right or wrong and give them a report on it, I tell them it doesn't matter what the event is. What you're going to face initially, if it's a power outage, sooner or later, after the 3 days of food that's gone from the grocery store, you're going to face civil unrest. Sooner or later, you're going to face it. And we saw a little touch of that in the 2020 riots, just a little touch. Now, can you imagine when all the food runs out at the grocery store with their just-in-time inventory, and sooner or later, people are going to get hungry? So initially, I think the biggest threat to us, once stuff goes down after a while, becomes, unfortunately, our neighbor, the people around us, the people that know that we're not losing weight when they're starving. And so preparing for civil unrest and preparing for the atrocities that people can do when they see their own family members starving, that's the real key right there.
I noticed for those of you who are watching this, you'll see in the background he's got a tactical kit and vest and helmet back there. So do you do tactical training as well as part of your? Yeah.
So I've been a firearms instructor for probably over 20 years. And right now I teach a doctrine that's promoted by the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces. And it's a little bit different than what we were traditionally teaching here in the United States with our SWAT. So the IDF understood a long time ago that doing the surround and contain thing that our SWAT used to do for an event was only stacking up bodies inside the event. It was never going to be a hostage situation for the most part. It was going to be stacking up bodies. So the IDF, what they do is first man on scene goes in. That's the way it works. And for an active shooter mitigation situation. So I teach through Israeli Tactical School International, and I have a Florida branch down here. I teach IDF tactics and methods for mitigating active shooter events or any type of firearm courses for that matter. But I focus it around IDF methods.
That's really cool, because if we're going to get into a civil unrest, we're going to have to learn to protect and defend our stuff. And unfortunately, that might mean you've got to use some Second Amendment stuff. We talk a little bit in code because YouTube sometimes gives us an attitude if we say the wrong thing. So if you hear us talking some code like that, you'll know it's to avoid. We got busted for, I don't even want to say it, but we got busted for lemon juice or something.
Medical and misinformation. Because
they're like, that's not the right, answer to help someone with their health concerns. Like what? No, anyway, so you teach, you mentioned earlier, and this is probably something that Scott alluded to with your workshops, is that you do MAG, mutual assistance group audits.
Correct.
What are you seeing in that world? Are you seeing a lot of people that are coming together? Are there a lot more of those now coming out? Are you seeing that people are actually doing pretty good, or are you seeing that like, whoa, you've cowboyed this for sure, and you really need some help? Like, what are you seeing?
Yeah. So mostly what I was seeing, especially at the beginning of starting that endeavor, was I was seeing that you'd get the runners and gunners that would want to show you their 30,000 rounds of freedom seeds, and then they end up with 2 weeks worth of food. And I say, guys, that's not the way to do it. I go, let's go in reverse. So I would audit, and of course they were hard chargers, so they were like, no, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about. Okay, but what I'm seeing now, especially after the J6 stuff went on, is I'm seeing a lot of people that were in formal groups are breaking away from that stigma of being in. We're not. You guys get it. For getting out of those type of groups and moving into the preparedness realm, because they realize there's a certain stigma involved with certain groups and certain. Anyway, after J6, there was certainly a stigma with that. So they're starting a lot of preparedness. And what I warn people mostly with starting a mags is you're going to get a lot of runners and gunners. You're going to get a lot of those guys that are just ready to go. But you might need a farmer. You might need a doctor. Okay. So certainly there's a place for everybody. And that's slowly starting to take a turn here lately, where now they're understanding everybody has value, especially in a SHTF scenario, not just the runners and gunners.
Well, it's interesting. It's like we talk about the rule of three a lot, and security isn't number one, right?
No.
It's staying alive starts with shelter, whether that's fire, whether that's a coat, whether that's a building, whatever it needs to be, right? And then you look at your medical needs, your water, and then your food, and then your security, right?
Yeah.
Security, though, is something that should be part of your plan no matter what. Whatever level you're at, you should have that in there on every aspect, but it's not the number one thing you need to triage in your preparedness plan first. And yeah, J6, a lot of people that I've talked to as well, a lot of people have kind of pulled back from the different public groups because the media has stigmatized it. It's like, I've even been in some, I wouldn't say in some groups, but I've subscribed to some groups that I won't do that anymore because it's too public. And one of the groups that I went with to do some training with, I was just like, wow, I could not stay on board because man, these guys are going to kill each other.
Yeah.
The organization, the lack of leadership, the lack of communication, it was really bad. And I would love to get more into some tactical training. I really am interested in your Israeli TAC 1, 2, and 3 class. Because I've done Israeli Krav Maga for years. I love it. I love the mindset of how they do things, but I'm not familiar at all with how their tactical process works. And you kind of started talking about it. Could we kind of rewind a little bit and
Sure.
explain what this course is?
Yeah. So the active shooter mitigation course, the TAC 1, 2, and 3, it's going to bring you from the basics of how the IDF teach it. Because remember, they're not a volunteer army. Everybody goes in. So they have to start from the very beginning. So TAC 1 is going to start with how does the IDF manipulate their firearms? And the way they do that is slightly different than the way we do it. It's not better, but it's not better or worse, but it's another tool in the toolbox. So the way they do magazine changes and they release the slide, it just different. But as far as, you mentioned Krav Maga and the mindset. Now, imagine taking that mindset of Krav Maga and bringing it to a firearms class. Imagine taking that mindset where you are not going to give up. You've got to go accomplish your goal. This is a life or death situation, and you're bringing that now to the firearms class for an active shooter event. And that's what we teach. Not to get into any specifics about. There's a lot of videos online. A lot of them make the tactics look terrible. There's some of them that are very good. My friend Emery with Tactical Rifleman does a great job teaching some of this stuff. But you can get overboard with some of the tactics, but you have to understand the principle behind it. And it's mostly about mindset. I always tell people, it doesn't matter how you accomplished your goal. Tactics don't matter if you won. If you won the day, it doesn't matter if you didn't do a mag change correctly. It doesn't matter. you won the day. And it delves into that mindset, much like probably you saw with Krav Maga, I imagine.
Oh yeah, it's always about avoid, right? Don't be there in the first place. If you can't avoid it, de-escalate it. If you can't de-escalate it, destroy it and then get out of there.
Exactly.
Right? Don't stay in the fight, end the fight and go. Get out of the danger zone.
There's an instructor that I was taking lessons from for a while, and I was like, in karate, they have the block, with Mr. Miyagi, whatever, Danielson, whatever, wax on, wax off, right? He's like, no, and this is he takes a bunch of arts and puts them together, and Krav Maga is one of the major influences. And he says, we don't have blocks. All of it is attacks. It's just kill the dude and get out of there. And I was like, wow, that's cool. I mean, not to kill the dude, but like disable them.
Disable him to the
point, get him to the point where he can't attack you, or you can run and get away from it. And I was just like, that is really cool. Cause he's like, we don't have blocks. We don't have defense. It's just full blown attack mode. And then walk away.
Best defense is a good offense.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I'll tell you something interesting we've done. There's an event in May called the Mountain Readiness Expo in Harmony, North Carolina. And we've taken our class for the 2 days after that event. And day one, we go through a basic pistol class. And then day two, we go through something called the TroysGate experience. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of TroysGate, but Google that. And it's the most realistic training you will ever get in your entire life. But we're doing that the 2 days following the Mountain Readiness event. And for 2 days, you're getting a TroysGate experience and a full day of basic pistol for like $500. You can't beat it.
Yeah, and I definitely recommend going to those events. Mountain Readiness, Toombs, Bob, he's awesome, and
he really
had
is.
him on the show. He's legit, like, he knows what he's doing. He knows the group. He knows a lot of the experts, and he's just a really good down to earth guy too. So guys, make sure you check out Mountain Readiness as well. They've got their own podcast, and they do, I think right now he's doing 3 to 4 events a year. So go check out his website, mountainreadiness.com. And then, yeah, so this is a 2-day training after that, is what you're saying.
Correct. Yeah. So day one will be with me all day on the range. And then you go through the TroysGate experience. And I'd like to try to articulate what the TroysGate experience really is, but there's no way to. All I can tell you is you're dealing with live people talking to you. That's not CGI. It's not it's not the virtual reality. It's a real person standing across from you, where you're using live rounds to mitigate that problem. Maybe you're de-escalating. Depends how it goes. But you're using your firearm and live rounds. And he's got a proprietary system that makes it all happen.
Really?
Wow.
Yeah, it's phenomenal. And let me tell you, these guys know how to get you to that level. They know how to get you to where, because their whole concept is what's the mindset? What happens during a stressful situation? How many times did you shoot? When I went through it the first time, they asked me, how many times did you shoot at the first bad guy? I go 3 times. Oh, let's watch the video. 8 times.
Wow.
That's really interesting.
It's fascinating. Best training you'll ever go through in your life. And if you couple it with the 2 days, you're going to walk away a happy person.
It's funny because it's like my first thought is, okay, a live experience. Shane and I did a kind of a laser tag-esque version, military grade laser tag. That was fun, but you get shocked in the process a lot.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, when it gets busy, it's busy. It's hard to know exactly what's going on and what you're doing. But to be live rounds,
yeah, using your weapon,
that's even
at people who know your name, know your background, and know how to get under your skin. It's fascinating.
Wow. So that's day 2.
That's day 2. Yep.
Wow. So, and what are the dates for that one?
That's the 2 days following Mountain Readiness. I think it's the 5th and 6th, guys. Double check that for you.
May 5th and 6th, 2025. Yeah, there's also one showing January 17th through 19th, 2025.
No.
So that's just the early bird pricing change. But yeah, you can camp there. There's vendor opportunities still available for those of you guys who are listening, but definitely go get your tickets now. If you're going to go to that, mountainreadiness.com. And you guys will get to meet Pete, because Pete's going to be there.
You'll get to meet me. You'll get to meet Franklin Horton. You get to meet Chris Weatherman, the Angry American. You'll get to meet a bunch of writers. I'm just tag along between those two, between Franklin Horton and Angry American. I just stay in the middle and try to get their scraps for sales, because those guys are machines.
Well, Chris has turned into a marketing genius with his books. I mean, they're just phenomenal, but he's dialed it in and he's figured out how to grow his audience, and it's been fun to watch. Because I've known him, I've known him a long time. I knew him first as an author to that. I didn't realize I watched him on Alone. Then I'm like, wait a minute. But yeah, I got him. I met him before he launched book 2, and been a huge fan ever since. But yeah, the whole world of prepping, people, they either get scared because of the scary parts and don't do anything, and they freeze and don't move forward, planning, preparing, getting better at being responsible. I mean, we talked about the responsibility as a father to our families. Do you just have the one daughter?
I do, yeah.
Right. My kids is the number one reason why I prep. Like, I've been prepping my whole life, but that is the number one reason. I've got to make sure they're safe. And for those of you guys listening, you're probably in the same boat. You're prepping to make sure that you and your family are first taken care of, right? Our moniker on the podcast used to be God, Family, and Country, but now it's God, Family, Community. We love our country, but you've got to focus on your community. You've got to build that community. Going to events like this will be great. Going to your trainings would be great. Getting into the books so you can find other readers. And it's a good way to bring up prepping to other people. Like, oh man, I just read this book. It's really interesting. Mm-hmm. What's kind of the feedback that you get from your audience that you've been able to meet?
Well, it's interesting, because the first time I went to the Mountain Readiness Advice, a young lady came up to me and she goes, "I just drove 4 hours to come meet you." And I go, "Why? What like, what are you, nuts?" So that I was really taken aback by that. It was really a heartfelt moment, and I try to make it a mission to shake everybody's hand when they come to my table, and if they're spending their hard-earned money on one of my silly books. But what I like to take from the books themselves is, if you look at my first book, 3 Days to Eden, that was my plan, man. That was how I was going to do everything. So you can find snippets of good prepping information from my books, and also from Chris Weatherman's book 1, Going Home. And it's a fine line between making it a prepping manual and still making it entertaining, right? Mm-hmm. So I get critiqued a little bit for, listen, they're making more of a manual, a how-to manual, but you still have to make it entertaining, which is, you can see that I progressed a little bit between book 1 and book 4 at this point, I think.
Awesome.
Yeah, that was one of the questions I was going to ask, is that if somebody reads the book, is it going to be purely entertaining, or are they going to actually have actionable lessons that they can take away from it as they're reading and say, you know what? The character in the book did this, that, and the other. I need to do that, this, and the other, to be able to be on the same page, or if they feel like they can relate, of course, to the scenario, situation, then they can learn from what the character in the book does and maybe copy that in their own life if they want to, or some variation of it. And I think that the way that I know Chris's books, I read his, when you read it with entertainment and education, it's really powerful, because it gives that, you get the excitement of the entertainment, but then you're also like, wait a minute, I actually learned how to prep when I was reading this.
Yeah, it's a home run, right? When you can find the fine art of melding the two together, it really makes for an entertaining book. And if one person gets something out of it that helps them and their family, it's a win for me. It honestly is. So, and I think these books are what we're geared toward. We try to bring awareness to preparedness. Right or wrong, in Birchwood Barning, the main character is really flawed. As a matter of fact, he thinks the whole preparedness guys are just whack jobs, and they're all conspiracy theorist guys. He's going to learn the hard way that he should have got on board a little earlier.
That's cool.
So it sounds like, obviously, you have I don't know if a unique perspective, but a similar perspective that as we do, and seeing and having to prepare to write your books and seeing what's going on in the world. Where do you feel we are right now? Because there's a lot of talk about World War III, a new civil war, a lot of stuff going on. Where do you see that we're at right now? And how would these books help out?
Yeah, so it's gonna give you an idea of some of the things. The books are gonna give you an idea of some of the things you should look out for. Certainly, the state of affairs we're in right now. I think seeing what's going on in Western North Carolina gives you an idea of the state of affairs that our country's in. Now, despite the whole Civil War thing, which we were probably a half inch away from going to having a civil war, in my opinion, not too long ago, but I think here you have to understand as a father, as a head of household, as a husband, is you are your family's first responder. The people in Western North Carolina are seeing that right now. There's a time when nobody is coming to help you, and you're responsible to help yourself. And that's the way I try to format all of my books. You can't rely on some of these federal agencies. They're just not. Well, they're inept. I'll just say it. They're inept.
Well, it's easy
We
to
saw
be
some of that,
inept
didn't we?
when everything is compartmentalized so much, right? And then there's also the ones that are just intentionally screwing people over, right?
Yeah.
You look at that one it goes by the F of the E, the M to the A,
But-
and every one of those is an expletive in my book. I would never trust or work with FEMA. They 100% are misusing the funds that they're given. They are not emergency management. They are 100% just garbage.
Yeah, and I think most people in our preparedness world understand that. And if they didn't understand that, seeing what happened in Western North Carolina needs to tell you that this is our new reality.
Oh, we could name even more, like out in Hawaii, right?
Oh,
Yeah.
certainly. Yeah.
So, and on the West Coast and the fires and so.
Yeah, it goes on, and for some reason, the majority of people in this country seem to keep their head in the sand and act like it didn't happen.
And
But
then
it
$1 billion,
happens.
then $1 billion goes off to Africa for relief. So
Yeah. I
very
wasn't going to
frustrating.
go there this evening. I wasn't.
Yeah, you mentioned that we were half an inch away from civil war not too long ago, and I'm not going to disagree with that. By the way, I'm just nervous that everybody is going to think that, okay, now that the certain results that have come in and we have certain leadership ready to take over, we don't need to prepare anymore. It's all going to be okay. And I'm like, no, the time to prepare is, as I've said this in many shows, the time to fix your roof is when the sun is shining, not when it's raining. So if we're going to, let's just pretend that the next 4 years in America, in the United States, is going to be, more calm. Let's just put it that way. That's the time to prepare. It's during the calm before the storm, because we don't know what's going to happen in 29 when the next, round of voting happens in this, in our country. So it's, to me, are you seeing and feel like some of our sponsors, our affiliate links have told us that sales are down, that things are, the traffic is down, coming to their sites. And I'm just nervous that people are going to get, complacent and sit back on their quote unquote laurels. And then all of a sudden we're going to get a sneak attack.
Well, hey, the stock market's up, right? So
Yeah.
it's all good.
Everything looks good. But what I tell everybody is, I think, and you're right, I did see a downtick in preparedness interest after this election. But I have the sneaky suspicion that there's going to be more civil unrest either just prior to inauguration and after than we've probably ever seen in our lifetime. And I think there are wheels in motion to make that happen. I think that there are certain parties that are looking to make that happen to destabilize the next incoming administration. I mean, almost to the point where they're talking about getting kinetic. So
yeah, we need to be ready for that.
Do you have an opinion on where you think those are going to happen most, or do you think it's going to be all over, or going to be pinpoint areas?
No, I suspect big cities. You're going to see it in, in Minneapolis, like you saw in the 2020 riots. I think you're going to see it in New York City, although they have made a complete 180. Their mayor has made a complete 180 here in the last couple of days, where he seems like he may be on board. But I think the precipice, and I don't know exactly what's going to spark the powder keg. It may be the immigration problem, where deportations start happening.
Gangs.
It may just because. Yeah, and it may just be because people just have TDS and can't stand to see the orange man in office. I don't know exactly what it's going to be, but I certainly expect an uptick in civil unrest, either prior to inauguration or soon after. But throughout that entire 4 years, there's going to be problems for the new administration.
Yeah, I feel like there's going to be, obviously you mentioned immigration. I kind of jokingly am thinking about some of these Hollywood stars that are immigrating out. And I'm like, okay, good. Immigrate out. That's fine.
Yes.
See ya. Don't let it hit you,
The door hits
So but you're right. There's a lot of people. I mean, supposedly we're in suburbia, in Utah here, where everything's hokey-dory and total conservative. And we had more counties turn blue, or the percentage went more blue than ever. And then we have a bunch of people. I think a friend of mine sent me a thing that some gang member from somewhere was holding somebody hostage or attacking somebody, and right here in Utah. And so it's like, if it's happening here in some of these towns in Utah, it's going to be happening in some of the more other towns that are going to be a little bit more rough and tough. I think.
Yeah.
I think you're right.
Yeah, and I think you hit it right on the head. I think, and the problem is everyone says, the immigration problems, that's a southern border problem. No, they ship these illegal immigrants, these thousands upon tens of thousands of gang members, to small towns all around this country.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not by accident that they sent these illegal immigrants to places that are typically red, counties that are typically red. That was very purposeful on the outgoing administration, and they did it for a specific reason. But they've made immigration a problem for the entire country, not just the southern border.
So with that specific possibility in mind, and knowing your background with firearms and training and so forth, and the potential things that are going to happen before inauguration, what is your advice to the average person, especially particularly when it comes to defending yourself? We know we talk about the like Scott said, the survival rules of 3, which come pretty naturally, right? Those are pretty easy, but self-defense, protection, safety doesn't necessarily, and that's kind of the harder for some people. What's your advice for those people?
Okay, so twofold. First of all, definitely get trained. If it's not with me, get trained with a reputable instructor, another reputable instructor. But the most important thing when it comes to preparedness and upcoming civil unrest is building a community, getting your group set. Listen, at some point, I'm going to have to sleep. Now, do I put security on my wife and child's back? I can't do that. At some point I have to garden. At some point I have to do whatever, go to the garage, and I don't have a 360 view around my body for a potential threat. So building a community is one of the key factors, in my opinion, for preparedness, followed by food and then shelter, water, security.
Mm-hmm.
Nice. Community's you. We call it a tribe. This is our tribe.
Yeah, but not necessarily a mag. I believe there's a difference between the two. Correct? Is that?
Well, mutual assistance group per se is just a tribe, just a community with a very firm set of bylaws, run like a business. The most successful mutual assistance groups I've ever met, ever audited, ever talked to are all run like businesses. They've got a CEO, they've got a director, they've got a board underneath them, and then they got people underneath them that they delegate certain activities to. Those are the most successful ones. And an important thing about a mutual assistance group, if you do it right, is all your members are stockholders. It's like buying a share in a company. So now they have a vested interest in the entire group, not just in their 1 or 2 people that they happen to know the best, right?
That's really interesting.
Cool.
That's cool.
That is cool.
Well,
So
thank
you're
you so
gonna-
much for taking the time to be with us tonight. Do you have any final questions, guys?
I was just going to say, how far do you expect to take your book series? How many more books do you think you'll get?
Who knows? I
Nice.
don't have any end date. I told my last publisher, I said, listen, when it's done being fun for me, I'm just going to disappear into the woods and no one's going to hear from me again. That's just the way it's going to be. So I'm not
Sounds
committing
good.
to a 5-book series. When it stops being fun, I'm retiring. That's it. I'm all done.
Awesome.
That's awesome. That's kind of the same approach we take to the podcast. Is if we just up and disappear one day, you'll know why.
Mhm.
You know,
Yeah.
when it's
Stop
done being
being
fun,
fun.
or we don't feel like we can help anybody any further, then yeah, it's time to move on. But thank you so much for being here. Any final parting words for our audience?
No, guys, build your community, get trained, and be safe. If you can't be safe, be dangerous. That's our motto.
Oh, I like that.
Ooh, I like that.
Well, Pete, thanks so much for being here. You guys can check him out at PeteRobertucci.com. And guys, one of the biggest problems in most people's preparedness is their communication. Communication falls apart, especially in an EMP or a cyber attack. It just gets decimated. So check out our friends over at hamradioprep.com. Use the code PrepperTalk. You'll save 10% on anything you buy over there site-wide. And the cool thing is you can get all of your licensing training, and then they have links to where you can actually go do the test or do the test online. So get that ham radio license. Be as cool as Shane is. We're on our way to getting there. Watch for me to have my license hopefully before the end of the year. That is my target. That is my goal. Thank you so much again, Pete, for being on with us. We appreciate you. And for everyone listening or watching, stay ready-minded, stay on task or stay on target, and have a happy holidays and a ready new year. Have a great night.
Take care.
See you
Thanks,
next
Pete.
week. Thanks, Pete.